Book 1, Chapter 4, Part 2. When I awoke, Will was already out of the tent. I could smell the aroma of hot cereal. I slipped out of my sleeping bag and looked out through the tent flap. Will was holding a pan over the fire. Renaud was nowhere to be seen, and his tent was gone. "Where's Renaud?" I asked, climbing out and walking over to the fire. "He's already packed up. He's up there working on his truck, getting ready so he can leave as soon as his part comes in." Will handed me a bowl of oatmeal and we sat on one of the logs to eat. "Did you two stay up late talking?" Will asked. "Not really. I told him all I need to know." Just then we heard sounds from the path. Renaud was hurriedly walking towards us. "I am all prepared. I must say goodbye." After several minutes of conversation, Renaud walked back up the steps and left. Will and I took turns bathing and shaving in the station owner's bathroom. Then we packed up our gear, filled up the vehicle with gas, and departed, heading north. "How far is Kula?" I asked. "We should be there before nightfall if we're lucky," he said, then added, "So what did you learn from Renaud?" I looked closely at him. He seemed to be looking for a specific answer. "I don't know," I said. "What conception did Renaud leave you with?" "That we humans, although we are conscious of it, have the tendency to control and dominate others. We want to win the energy that exists between people. It builds us up somehow, makes us feel better." Will was looking straight ahead at the road. He looked as if he was suddenly thinking of something else. "Why do you ask? Is this the fourth insight?" He looked at me. "Not quite. You have seen the energy flow between people, but I am not sure you know how it feels when it happens to you." "Then tell me how it feels," I said, growing exasperated. "You accuse me of not talking. Getting information out of you is like pulling teeth. I've been trying for days to find out more about your past experiences with the manuscript, and all you do is put me off." He laughed, then shot me a smile. "We had a deal, remember? I have a reason for being secretive. One of the insights concerns how to interpret the events of one's past life. It is a process of becoming clear about who you are, what you are here on the planet to do. I want to wait until we reach this insight before we discuss my background, okay?" I smiled at his venturous tone. "Yeah, I guess." For the remainder of the morning we rode in silence. The day was sunny and the sky blue. Occasionally, as we proceeded higher into the mountains, thick clouds would float across our path, covering the windshield with moisture. Around noon, we pulled over at an overlook that afforded a spectacular view of the mountains and the valleys to the east. "Are you hungry?" Will asked. I nodded, and he pulled 2 carefully wrapped sandwiches from a bag on the back seat. After he handed me one of them, he asked, "What do you think of this view?" "It's beautiful." He smiled slightly and stared at me, giving me the impression that he was observing my energy field. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Just looking," he said. "Mountain peaks are special places that can build energy in whomever sits on them. You look as though you have an affinity for mountain overlooks." I told Will of my grandfather's valley and of the ridge overlooking the lake and how it made me feel alert and energized the same day Charlene had arrived. "Perhaps growing up there prepared you for something here, now." I was about to ask him more about the energy that mountains provide when he added, "When a virgin forest is on a mountain, the energy is amplified even more." "Is the virgin forest we're headed for on a mountain?" I asked. "Look for yourself. You can see it." He pointed toward the east. Miles away I could see 2 ridges which ran parallel to each other for what looked like several miles. Then they converged, forming a V-shape. In the space between the 2 ridges lay what looked like a small town, and at the vortex, the point where the 2 ridges met, the mountain rose sharply and butted off into a rocky summit. The summit appeared slightly higher than the ridge we were on, and the area around its base seemed much greener, as though covered with lush foliage. "That area of green?" I asked. "Yes, it's like Vicient, but much more powerful and special." "How is it special?" "It facilitates one of the other insights." "How?" He started the Jeep, then pulled back on the road. "I'm betting that you'll find out." Neither of us said much more for an hour or so, then I drifted off to sleep. Some time later, Will was shaking my arm. "Wake up, we're coming into Kula." I sat up in the seat. Ahead of us, in a valley where the two roads came together, was a small town. On both sides were the two ridges we had seen. The trees on the ridges seemed as large as those at Vicient, and spectacularly green. "I want to tell you something before we drive in," he said. "In spite of the energy of this forest, this town is a lot less civilized than other areas of Peru. It's known as a place to get information about the manuscript, but the last time I was here, it was full of greedy types who didn't feel the energy and didn't understand the insights. They merely wanted the money or recognition they might get by discovering the ninth." I looked at the village. It consisted of 4 or 5 streets and avenues. Large frame buildings lined the 2 main roads that crossed in the center of town, but the other streets were little more than alleyways lined by small dwellings. Parked at the crossroads were perhaps a dozen off-the-road vehicles and trucks. "Why are all these people here?" He smiled daringly. "Because it's one of the last places to get gas and supplies before going deeper into the mountains." He started a jeep and drove slowly into town, then stopped in front of one of the larger buildings. I couldn't read the Spanish signs, but from the products in the window, I presumed it was a grocery and hardware. "Wait here for a moment. I want to go in for a few things." I nodded as Will disappeared inside. As I looked around, a truck pulled up across the street and several people got out. One was a dark-haired woman in a fatigue jacket. To my amazement, I realized it was Marjorie. She and a young man in his early 20s crossed the street and walked right in front of me. I opened my door and got out. "Marjorie!" I yelled. She stopped and looked around, then saw me and smiled. "Hello," she said. As she began to walk towards me, the young man grabbed her arm. "Robert told us not to talk with anyone," he said very softly, trying not to let me overhear. "It's okay. I know this person. Go on in." He looked at me skeptically, then backed away and went into the store. I tried then, in a stuttering way, to explain what had happened between us at the gardens. She laughed and told me that Sarah had related everything to her. She was about to say something else when Will walked out with a handful of supplies. I introduced them, and then we all talked for a few minutes as Will placed the supplies in the back of the Jeep. "I have an idea," Will said. "Let's get something else to eat across the street." I looked over at what appeared to be a small cafe. "Sounds good to me," I said. "I don't know," Marjorie replied. "I need to leave soon. My ride." "Where are you going?" I asked. "Back to the west a couple of miles. I've come up to visit a group studying the manuscript." "We can take you back later, after dinner," Will commented. "Well, I guess that will be okay." Will looked at me. "I have one more thing to pick up. You two go ahead and order, and I'll order something when I get there. I'll only be a few minutes." We agreed, and Marjorie and I waited as several trucks passed. Will walked down the street and to the south. Suddenly, the young man with whom Marjorie had arrived walked out of the store and confronted us again. "Where are you going?" he said, holding her arm. "This is a friend of mine. We're going to eat, and then he can run me back later." "Look, you can't trust anyone up here. You know Robert wouldn't approve." "It's okay." "I want you to come with me now." I took his arm and pulled it off Marjorie. "You heard what she told you." He stepped back and looked at me, suddenly appearing very timid. He turned and walked back into the store. "Let's go," I said. We walked across the street and into the small diner. The eating area consisted of one room and just 8 tables, and was permeated with the smell of grease and smoke. I spotted an unoccupied table on the left. As we walked over, several people glanced up at us for an instant, then returned to what they were doing. The waitress spoke only Spanish, but Marjorie knew the language well and ordered for both of us. Afterward, Marjorie looked at me warmly. I grinned at her. "Who is that guy you were with?" "That's Kenny. I don't know what's wrong with him. Thanks for helping." She was looking directly into my eyes, and her comment made me feel wonderful. "How did you get connected with that group?" Robert Jensen is an archaeologist. He's formed a group to study the manuscript and search for the ninth insight. He came by Vicient a few weeks back, and then a couple days ago. What? I asked. Well, I was in a relationship at Vicient that I wanted to get away from. Then I met Robert, and he was so charming and what he was doing seemed so interesting. He convinced me that our research at the gardens would be enhanced by the ninth insight, and that he was on his way to find it. He said searching for the ninth insight would be the most exciting thing he has ever done, and when he offered me a place on his team for a few months, I decided to accept. She paused and looked down at the table. She appeared uncomfortable, so I changed the subject. How many of the insights have you read? Only the one I saw at Vicient. Robert has some others, but he believes people have to rid themselves of their traditional beliefs before they can understand them. He says he would rather they learn the key concepts from him. I must have frowned, because she added, You don't like that much, do you? It sounds suspicious, I said. She looked at me intensely again. I wondered about it too. Maybe when you take me back, you can talk with him and tell him what you think. The waitress arrived and brought our food, and as she was walking away, I saw Will come in the door. He walked quickly to our table. I've got to meet some people about a mile north of here, he said. I'll be gone about 2 hours. Take the jeep and take Marjorie back. I'm riding with someone else. We can meet back here. He shot me a smile. The thought came to me to tell him about Robert Jensen, but I decided against it. Okay. He looked at Marjorie. Nice to have met you. Wish I had time to stay and talk. She looked at him with her coy expression. Maybe some other time. He nodded, handed me the keys, and walked away. Marjorie ate for a few minutes, then said, He seems like a man with a purpose. How did you meet him? I told her in detail of my experiences upon first arriving in Peru. As I talked, she listened intently, so intently, in fact, that I found myself telling the story with great ease and expressing the dramatic turns and episodes with insights and true flair. She seemed spellbound, hanging on every word. Goodness, she said at one point. Do you think you're in danger? No, I don't think so. Not this far from Lima. She was still looking at me expectantly, so while we finished eating, I briefly summarized the events at Vicient up to the point where Sarah and I had arrived at the gardens. That's where I met you, and you ran off. Oh, it wasn't like that. I just didn't know you, and when I saw your feelings, I thought it was best to leave. Well, I apologize for letting my energy get out of hand. She looked at her watch. I guess I should be getting back. They will be wondering about me. I left enough money for the bill and we walked outside to Will's Jeep. The night was chilly and we could see a trace of our breath. As we got in, she said, Head back north on this road. I'll tell you when to turn. I nodded and made a quick U-turn in the street and headed that way. Tell me more about this farm we're going to, I said. I think Robert rents it. Apparently his group has been using it for a long time while he studied the insights. Since I've been there, everyone has been assembling supplies and readying the vehicles, things like that. Some of his men seem very rough. Why did he invite you along? He said he wanted a person who could help interpret the last insight once we found it. At least that's what he said back at Vicient. Here he has only talked about supplies and helping to prepare for the trip. Where is he planning to go? I don't know. He never answers me when I ask.